All right, we're going to go ahead and get started with introductions. And so in no particular order, I'm just going to go ahead and reach out to individuals I see here on the call. And if you could just state your name and the organization that you represent, and perhaps just a brief overview of your role, that would be helpful for those that are joining us today. And of course, anyone that is watching via the Zoom link. So thank you for that. So I'm going to go ahead and start with Steve Knapp.
Good morning. My name is Steve Knapp. I'm the operations manager for Hope Inc. And basically, I cover facilities and transportation.
Great. Thank you, Steve. I appreciate you being here today. And let's see, I see Lisa Reams.
Good morning. My name is Lisa Reams, and I am the Vice President for Programs and Services at Pima Council on Aging.
Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate you being here this morning. Let's see, I see Haley Tamon.
Hi, this is Haley Thoman. I work at Direct Advocacy and Resource Center as the Associate Director, and I oversee their core services.
Thank you. I appreciate you being here this morning. All right, let's see who else is on the call today so that make sure I'm not missing anyone. All right, looks like that concludes our introductions, at least for right now. I'm just going to ask for a little grace for anyone who might still be trying to log in, that if they join here in the next few moments, that we'll just kind of circle back and allow them to introduce themselves as well. And just as I said that, a couple of people have joined us, so look at that. So we're on the right track here. So if someone else still joins as we're making our way through the agenda items, we'll try to reach out to those that have joined and make sure that they have an opportunity to introduce. So with that being said, I see that Mandy Hendricks is on the call. So good morning, Mandy.
Good morning. Mandy Hendricks with Easter Seals Blake Foundation.
Thank you, Mandy. I appreciate you being here this morning. And then I see Malia.
Hi, Malia Chavez. I'm the CEO for the Community Food Bank of Southern Arizona. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Malia. I appreciate you being here this morning. Let's see. And then I think I see Shaylin Turney.
Good morning. This is Shaylin with Project More, and I'm the director here, and we work with families and children with special needs. And that's all.
All right. Well, great. Thank you, Shaylin. I appreciate you being here as well. Let's see if we have anyone else that has just joined. And if not, we're going to go ahead and move forward with the next item on the agenda. And like I had shared a moment ago, if anyone else joins, we're going to take a moment to make sure they have an opportunity to introduce themselves as well. So thank you for your flexibility on that. All right, we're going to go ahead and move forward with the next item on the agenda. All right, so we're going to just briefly go over the in-kind form, just as a refresher. So for every meeting, with regard to our regional planning efforts, they're enhanced by recording the time donated by attendees, volunteers, and participants. And so, of course, PAG collects data on the time dedicated to those meetings and activities to apply for use as matching funds for grants and federal dollars. And so if you as a participant in this meeting are paid with federal dollars, please let us know now so that we don't calculate your time in this meeting as part of our in-kind calculations. So with that being said, time spent in preparation for this meeting will be estimated by PAG staff who are knowledgeable of the agenda and of course the associated meeting materials. And then at the conclusion of this meeting, the session report will automatically calculate your time spent in this meeting. So time spent working on PAG or RTA initiatives, programs, and special projects may also be eligible for consideration for matching funds. So at this time, if you are on this call and you are paid through federal dollars, I would ask that you acknowledge that now so that we can make sure our in-kind reporting is accurate.
I am, Janine.
Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate that.
I am as well.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
This is Haley. I am as well.
Okay, thank you. All right, and then I see Lisa has joined us as well. So I'm going to go ahead and allow Lisa to, or I'm sorry, Elizabeth to introduce herself as well.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, every time I struggle with the link getting into this meeting, my apologies. Liz Cozy, I work for the United Way of Tucson in Southern Arizona, and I oversee both our financial wellness and our older adult initiatives. Nice to be here.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I appreciate you being here. So, all right, we're going to go ahead and move forward with the next element in our agenda. And I'm just going to take a quick look and make sure I'm not missing anyone else who may have just joined the call, so we can make sure we're doing appropriate introductions. So it looks like this is all of us for right now. So again, if someone else joins, we'll do our best to make sure they have a moment to introduce and catch them up as appropriate. So we're going to move forward with this particular item on the agenda, which is the focus of today's meeting, which is funding prioritization and recommendations. So with that being said, some of you may have submitted a fact sheet that you wanted for us to kind of reconcile as part of this process for public input. And just as a reminder, those fact sheets, as we've referred to them as, they were templates, and they just kind of served as a tool for you to be able to submit regional input pertinent to the different broad service categories, and also as kind of a mechanism for you to refer back to as we lean into this opportunity of seeking additional public input, but also making recommendations regarding the funding allocations and the associated prioritization, if you will, of those funding allocations across the different broad service categories. So just want to kind of make sure kind of recapped on that. And then the other piece that I want to make sure that we're clear is that, again, just as a reminder, all of the regional input and the data that we use to make these recommendations is supposed to have a regional focus, and it's, of course, regional input and not agency-centric or program-centric. So as we work through this public input process and work towards making recommendations that will go to regional council, we want to make sure that we keep that in mind. So without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and ask my IT team to go ahead and pull up the funding allocations for the social services block grant, and we are going to be kind of reviewing the state fiscal year 2025 funding allocations and associated priorities as given to us through the Department of Security, Economic Security, that is. And we're going to just go through the 5 tabs just as a quick refresher, and then we're just going to open it up with regard to potential recommendations. And if you received some of the kind of the guidance for how to prepare, if you will, for this particular meeting, we'll be making recommendations with regard to these particular broad service categories and the prioritizations. And as a subcommittee, you can make recommendations that would either leave the allocations the way that they are, or move to make recommendations with regard to shifting either a specific dollar amount or a percentage, which obviously would get then calculated into a dollar amount from within the broad service categories or to a different broad service category. So when I say within a broad service category, that would be the monies would stay within the broad service category, but shift within service intents based on the prioritization of regional needs with regard to those service intents. So that's what we're going to be championing today in terms of seeking your input to make recommendations around those particular funding allocations and prioritizations. And so just as a refresher for how we move forward with this, obviously everyone has a lot of input and passion behind the work that they do, and we just need to make sure that as we move forward this, that we come from a place of kindness and respectfulness and professionalism as we navigate making these recommendations to get submitted to regional council. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the first tab or broad service category, but it is the first tab on the spreadsheet that is up on the screen, and that is the Department of Child Safety. And as a refresher, the service intents for this particular broad service category is rooted in supportive intervention guidance counseling, and then of course early intervention in behavioral therapeutic activities. And there are different associated service intents with each of those, and we discussed those or reviewed those in previous meetings, so we will not go over those again, but just as a quick recap, that is the essence of this particular broad service category. And then the next tab or broad service category is DAAS, and we're going to go ahead and pull that up on the screen. And that is the Division of Aging and Adult Services. And there are quite a few different service intents with regard to this particular broad service category, and they range from case management to home delivered meals, emergency shelter, supportive intervention, guidance and counseling, legal assistance, and housing support services. And so all those are different service intents within that particular broad service category. And then the next broad service category is WDA, which is Workforce Development Administration. And this one has really just one service intent, and that is employment services. And then the last particular tab or broad service category on this spreadsheet is RSA, or Rehabilitation Services Administration. And this is rooted in primarily interpreter services for deaf adults, and then of course supportive intervention, guidance and counseling for hearing impaired persons. And so you'll see the different service intents there as well. So those are the different broad service categories, and we're going to go ahead and move back on what you're seeing on the screen. Just for simplicity, we're going to move back to the Department of Child Safety, the DCS tab, just so that everyone is on the same page or same broad service category. So I'm going to ask that our IT team have that up on the screen, and I see that it is, so thank you for that. So for the next step, if you will, now that we've reviewed the different broad service categories, I know some of you submitted a fact sheet, which is helpful. Some of you may have chose to not submit a fact sheet, and that is okay, but we are going to move forward with still seeking your input and your thought process on these different funding allocations and prioritizations. So just to keep things somewhat streamlined, I guess the first question at hand would be, does anyone see a need to change the allocations or the prioritizations of the allocations within the Department of Child Safety? Meaning that if we're looking at Department of Child Safety, does anyone feel that we have enough of a regional need and facts and merit to warrant changing funding within one service intent to another service intent within the Department of Child Safety category? Looking to see if anyone has their hand up to speak to that before moving on. Okay, so I don't see anyone's hand up. So at least right at this stage, it looks like by default, if you will, right, because no one has shared anything otherwise, that we are comfortable with the prioritization as it stands with regard to Department of Child Safety, with regard to the prioritization of the different service intents. All right, so then I'm going to go ahead and ask our IT team to move to DAAS, which is the Division of Aging and Adult Services. And so I'm going to ask a very similar question for this particular broad service category. And that was, does anyone have some thoughts or some input based on regional need with regard to whether or not any changes need to be made with regard to the prioritization of the funding within the different service intents? Meaning, should we move potentially any monies from one particular service intent to another, whether it be a specific dollar amount or a percentage? So that is what I'm asking at this juncture. Okay, I see Malia has her hand up. So Malia, I'm going to go ahead and ask for your input at this time.
Sure. So I just had a question, given that I know last time Pima Council on Aging, I believe, had somebody present and just talk about the need around the current lack of funding for the home deliveries. So
Yes.
I'm looking at that line item, which is at 80,000, and I'm not, well versed enough to know in the other line items what has wiggle room or not. But it does seem to me that we know that there's a specific gap there and a decrease in funding to try to make that line whole. I don't know if there's a similar cut in any of the other larger line items that still fall within the elder adult lines. So I don't know if I'm speaking out of turn, please let me know. I feel like that's a big one. And if we had submitted a fact sheet, that's probably one of the sections that we would have provided information for as the Community Food Bank of Southern Arizona. And just saying that we are, again, similar to Pima Council on Aging, seeing the increased need from our neighbors and knowing that there's that reduction. So overall, this is an increasing need. And so if there's any room to make them whole again as a category, I think that's a need for our vulnerable elders.
Okay, thank you. And that was specific to home delivered meals, if I heard you correctly.
Yes, because that was the only one that I specifically heard was facing a cut and would have a detrimental impact in a specific group.
All right, thank you for sharing that input. I see that Lisa Reams has her hand up. Lisa, go ahead.
Thank you. And Malia, you were not out of line at all. I'm Lisa Reams from Pima Council on Aging. I'm the one who presented last time. So for the 3 areas that are listed as elderly or persons with disabilities, which is home care, case management, and home delivered meals, all of them are currently having to reduce people that are receiving services by 25 to 35%. So there's a decrease in all of those areas. However, I originally had raised my hand to say something very similar to what Malia just said, which is we remain most deeply concerned about nutritional needs for older adults. It's not that they don't need the case management in home care, they absolutely do, and that's absolutely being reduced as well. But traditionally, historically at Pima Council on Aging, we've tried to prioritize the nutritional needs for our older adults, and it is becoming increasingly difficult to do that. We're currently reducing the Pima Meals on Wheels system by 30 to 35% of people being served, which means we're not cutting anyone off of it. We're just going to allow it to happen through attrition and waitlist everybody that needs nutrition right now until it's come down to basically from 1,200 and something to 800 individuals. So there is an enormous need there. And I would also be interested in seeing, there's no way to make it whole. I mean, you'd be talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars in additional funding to make that whole. But if there's any way to shift some funding to put a little extra, at least in home delivered meals, the impact would be significantly felt by the most vulnerable older adults in the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm going to open it up based on the feedback that you have shared and also Malia. Does anyone have a recommendation on what percentage or what amount you would like to recommend moving, if at all? And from what particular prioritization as well?
Sorry.
No, I'm sorry, Elizabeth, go ahead.
I have to say out loud that this is such a challenging conversation and decision, because clearly, we're in the middle of a housing crisis as well. All the legal assistance and emergency shelter stuff is going to be, critical as other funding sources dry up as well. So I'm not being helpful. I'm just commiserating with all of you about, like, if we take, from Peter to, what's the expression? Take from,
I think it's rob Peter to pay Paul, or
yeah,
something
exactly.
along those lines. Yes.
I don't know. Yeah.
I feel similarly to Elizabeth. I think to Malia's point, I don't know spent. I don't know where there's wiggle room. So it's really hard to say, well, just pull from this category and put it here, because who knows Like if all of those dollars were needed for all of those categories, like you look at them and I don't think any of them are like not worthy of funding. So is there any way to know if all the money was spent, or is that not?
I don't really have any information on that at this time. So it would be inappropriate for me to speak to that. I just know that the funding amounts total, you know, the total amounts across all the broad service categories historically has not changed that much, but how it gets reconciled between the different service intents, that I don't really have that level of detail, or, you know, how much was spent in each one historically either. So
I am wondering if it is at all possible as part of this subcommittee's recommendation, you know, besides moving money around, is it possible to advocate for additional resources in this line item, so that if we're saying we feel like it needs an extra $40,000, whatever it is, 20,000, can we advocate for that so that at the end of this process, if there are additional resources, can it be allocated to that line? Again, I don't know enough about moving the dollars around. And I mean, the amounts are so beyond reasonable in my opinion, you know, literally $19,216.45. Like, people are asking for the bare minimum of what they need in order to provide a service that is very essential. So I hate to get into that, you know, trimming from one area to help another. But if it's clear that this is an area that is not receiving sufficient funding, and if there's any opportunity to make an addition later, could we recommend that as a subcommittee?
I believe that part of the process is to make recommendations, and they'll go to council, and then obviously there is a public comment period, and then through that, eventually the recommendations do make its way to Arizona Department of Economic Security. So what I believe we can do as part of this public input process is make that notation within our overall recommendations, is that, and this is an example because we have not come to a conclusion on this yet, but if the committee were to make the recommendations as we would like to leave the funding allocations as is, meaning as written in the current spreadsheet that we're viewing right now. However, if there was funding remaining, our recommendation is for those remaining funds to be allocated to these particular service intents in this priority. We could put that as part of our recommendations when we submit it to regional council in public comment period. I can leave it at that. I think that is something that we could do.
Thank you for that, Malia. That's a terrific point to make, you know, because we're shuffling things around to the detriment of other line items if we do that. However, and Lisa, maybe you can speak to this, there are certainly other funding sources for some of these other buckets. And I wonder, you know, do we feel like the home delivered meals situation is one that we've really tapped into all of the available potential financial support of funding streams?
That's certainly a conversation we're having internally at Pima Council on Aging, we're in the process of planning kind of a fund campaign around raising funds for Pima Meals on Wheels. And just to clarify one point, when I said that it might be most beneficial to move some money into home delivered meals, I was really speaking of from the first two categories, and money in the first three categories all goes to Pima Council on Aging for all I know. So I'm not talking about taking something from another agency to put it to Pima Council on Aging. Basically, I'm saying even within those categories for the Area Agency on Aging, we're seeing that there might be a greater need in one. But I mean, but the point is absolutely accurate that all of the areas are facing, for older adults, are facing 25 to 35% service cuts in the next few months. So yes, any place we would put more money into, we would be making another area less available to meet the needs of the older adults who are certainly vulnerable in their housing situations and such as well. So it is an incredibly difficult thing. And I wish I had the magic 8-ball to say which of those areas are more fundable in other ways. For the moment, none of them, but you know, we're working on it.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm just going to make sure that I reach out to anyone else that may have their hand up. I don't want to accidentally miss someone who has their hand up. I only can see so many people at a time on my little screen, so I'm just trying to make sure that I expand my view and make sure that I can see everyone. So with on that note, though, if there's anyone else that has a comment or some thoughts on this particular discussion item, I'm opening up the floor for additional comments and thoughts on this. As a subcommittee, it's important that we hear from as many people as part of this public input process. So if you have a thought process on this, now would be the time to share your thoughts. All right, I see Shaylin has her hand up. Shaylin, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm just kind of looking at it, and there's there's those 3 categories for the legal assistance, right?
Correct.
And I guess I'm just questioning the one for the legal issues for individuals and families in need of food stamp assistance. I'm not knowledgeable about this, but either you qualify or you don't. So I guess I'm just kind of questionable about that one. Because I mean, I guess, you know, down in that other one, to protect the rights of individuals, providing assistance with civil legal issues. I'm just trying to focus in on my screen here. So I don't know what, I guess, what is the logic for that one? I mean, just to educate me. Does that make sense?
I'm going to open it up for anyone else that feels like they're qualified to speak to that. That is not something that I'm qualified to speak to, unfortunately. But what I will say is that of our level of understanding around that particular element, as part of the process, we need to make sure that whatever decisions we make is based on our understanding of the regional need. And so I want to make sure that that part is clear, that we definitely still have to understand the regional need as we look to make recommendations. Obviously, understanding how that process works is helpful. I'm not minimizing that, but we still have to make decisions based on facts, and those facts are rooted in regional needs. So, and not agency specific or agency centric. So if anyone would like to speak to that question that Shaylin brought up, I'd be more than happy to allow you to have that time to explain that piece, but that's not for me to speak to for sure. I'm not in that area.
Well, okay, so I mean, it's just, I mean, the legal assistance for all those is close to $70,000. So I don't know.
Janine, do we
So-
have a fact sheet that's been submitted on any of those topics that we could look to?
Not on legal assistance, no. I will double check that, but based on what I've seen, I don't see anything that speaks to legal assistance, unless I missed something, but pretty confident I didn't see anything on legal assistance.
So I can't, I mean, I don't know what this is referring to. And Shaylin, I don't know if your question was more, you know, is this a necessary assistance when we have, for instance, even at the Community Food Bank of Southern Arizona, right? DES workers are on site and they provide the same support. As as an attorney in my old life, I could say, I know this could present issues with maybe previous felonies, for instance, where there was an expungement and now maybe they're eligible, but on its face, maybe they were denied. When we're looking at those civil rights issues, that's what it triggers for me. So potentially this is for a subsect of people who are applying and have been denied wrongfully. And this is helping them try to get their eligibility established. I don't know. I have nothing to do with this program, so I'm not sure, but if that's helpful at all, that's what it triggered for me when I read that.
Okay, thank you. That's some insight. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Shaylin. I appreciate you asking a good question as part of this process. I think it's helpful to examine these different areas and ask those questions so that everyone is kind of on the same footing or same level of knowledge about these different categories. So I appreciate you asking the question. So with regard to this particular broad service category and pertinent to the discussions at hand with regard to finding the balance, if you will, on these different service intents and recognizing some of the challenges that are inherent to funding relative to the regional need. What other thoughts do we have with regard to either shifting monies or making a recommendation that says that the funding allocations as they are written right now stay the same? However, if there was funding remaining, we would want those monies shifted to these particular service intents in a particular order. I'm not suggesting that that's the path. I am a neutral entity, but that's based on what I thought I was hearing from the group. So I'm kind of trying to reconcile where we stand still with regard to the discussion. So I'm going to open it back up for additional feedback on what we believe should potentially be a recommendation for this particular category. We still have other categories to move through, and after we get through those, we can definitely circle back. So this is not the only opportunity, but we do need to make sure that we're mindful of the time so that we can give an appropriate amount of time for the other service categories as well.
I feel like that captured it perfectly. Thank you.
So would someone like to paraphrase what they believe their understanding is for this right now? Because my perception is we're saying that we, as the subcommittee, are leaving the funding allocations as written by the Department of Economic Security. However, if there is funding remaining, we would want those remaining funds to go where? That's the where part is where I feel like I'm still not clear.
Line item 9, home delivery meals,
okay,
as we discussed here.
Okay, and that's the only one?
That's the only one that I'm speaking to. If other folks have other priorities, please add them to the list, but that was the only one that I was speaking on.
All right, thank you.
If we were facing a windfall, I would vote for some additional funding for housing support services, but please, others may have differing opinions.
My top priority would be home delivered meals as well. Not that there aren't several that are worthy.
I could echo Elizabeth's concern around housing. We provide information and referral services to really anyone in the community, but specifically people with disabilities, and affordable housing is like non-existent. And then when you add access to it, it's like impossible. So if there was just an abundance of money left over, I would definitely say that last line team probably use more.
All right, so I apologize. Sometimes audio cuts out a little bit on my end, so I hear fragments of a word. So I'm going to kind of recap what I believe I understood, and then I'm going to ask for everyone to give me some feedback if you feel what I shared is commensurate with your understanding as well. So what I believe I hear was that leaving the funding allocations and prioritizations as written. However, if monies were available after the fact, after, you know, monies are spent, the priority for where those monies would go to would be rooted in what's listed as item 9, which is home delivered meals, and line item number 17, which is housing support services. Is that an accurate reflection?
I think that's accurate unless anyone has an objection.
That's how I understood it, Janine, too.
Okay, so then the next question that I have with regard to my understanding from the subcommittee is, this is a question, are we placing any kind of prioritization between line item number 9, home delivered meals, and line number 17, meaning if monies were available, it would first go here and then here if monies are still available, or is the group just saying if any monies are available, DES can decide on their own how they want to allocate those funds, but we would want them to go to these two categories?
Since this is about older adults, I would defer to Lisa, maybe to tell us, you know, in terms of their hotline, are they getting more calls about meals or housing, you know, or what they perceive as the prioritized need?
I have a lot of updated data from our helpline, but I can tell you the absolute number one call that we get is people unable to afford food and wondering what food resources there are in general, not home delivered meals per se, just food in general. But that upwards of 60% of the calls to the helpline these days are people that are in emergency financial or crisis situations. And it's hard to say that's food or housing, or I mean, it's the whole mix of I cannot afford my life. So I can't break that down more closely for you, but the number one call is food.
Yeah, and I would just say from our perspective at the Community Food Bank, it is just the skyrocketing cost of food and the amount at which we are having to purchase food for the first time ever in our history is unprecedented. And so I do think that this is an issue that is really weighing heavy on folks and will continue to be an issue. So as much as it would be a friendly amendment, I would say prioritizing trying to put as much resources into the home delivered meals and then putting resources into the housing piece would just be my recommendation for this section only. I mean, I think, again, it's just, I don't see very many opportunities for us to advocate for the home delivery piece. And so that's why I'm sort of using this platform now, because they're few and far between, to Lisa's point, while they're exploring all these other options that are very hard to find.
So I'm gonna throw out a question for clarity, but also to ensure that the way that we make any kind of recommendation is rooted in the correct process, if you will, in the sense that the direction that we're given from the Department of Economic Security is that we look at broad service categories based on regional need, and that activities are billable, if you will, relative to that service intent, right? So how should I say this? So I want to be careful with my language so I don't get anything misconstrued. So we can recognize that there is an uptick, if you will, in a concern or a need for food, right? Because of rising costs, et cetera. However, not all of those people would arguably qualify, and this is a question, I don't, this is not my area of expertise, would qualify for home delivered meals. So when we're saying whether or not the prioritization needs to go to home delivered meals versus housing support services, I want to make sure that we're not blurring data, if you will, because yes, there can be an uptick in concern but if that uptick, the vast majority of them aren't necessarily qualifying for home delivered meals, and we put monies under the veil of, like, because there's this larger need for addressing, you know, challenges in getting food, that we might be, you know, misleading ourselves a little bit, you know, in the sense that a lot of those people may not even qualify for home delivered meals. So did we really accomplish what we hoped to set out to accomplish by making that recommendation? So I just want to make sure we're really careful that we say what the regional need is, and we make this decision that we're all confident in that whatever shift or in funding, so to speak, that would come by available funds potentially being available at the end, right? We don't know that. That home delivered meals still is right, that we have enough data to support that versus the home support services. And I don't even like using the word versus because it sounds competitive. As we make a prioritization, we were choosing one over the other, that we're rooted in data that's regional need driven, and we have not heard anything, if that's an appropriate word choice. So forgive me if my vernacular is not meeting the needs here. I just want to make sure we're on point with that. So give some additional clarification on the regional need for specifically for home delivered meals relative to the overall need for food assistance, so that we can make sure we're walking the right line on this. I would be grateful, and I think it's important as we make these kind of recommendations.
So I see Lisa has her hand up. Did you want to respond?
Oh, sorry. I see Lisa and Malia's hand up, so I apologize. Go ahead, Lisa.
Sure. I think you raise an excellent point, Janine, and that's really important. You have to understand with home delivered meals, you're looking at people that are either over the age of 60 or between 18 and 59 living with a physical disability, who are unable to get to the grocery store to shop for themselves, and are unable to actually prepare a meal for themselves because of their limitations in their activities of daily living. So it's not just a matter of you know, an adult that can't afford food. So you're right, those are two separate issues. So we need to understand when we're talking about home delivered meals as it's presented here, that is specific to those populations and those needs, which can be tied in with the larger need, but is separate than, for example, the shortage of food at the community food bank, or the cost of the cost of buying food at the community food bank for more the general population.
Yeah, and I just wanted to speak to the fact that they are two separate things. The point here, and the reason I raised this, was because this area of service is directly being cut, which means a number of folks that already are eligible will roll off, right, eventually through attrition. And you will see, even if you go back in a couple of months and look at a wait list, you'll have a number of eligible folks who are not able to access this service. In addition, what we have found through our work here and trying to figure out expanding our own home delivery programs is we have a number, hundreds of people who are eligible, but have a challenge even getting to us to complete the paperwork or to make sure that they can in fact access the resources. So again, I just think this is not an area, to the point Lisa made earlier, it would take hundreds of thousands of dollars or something to make this program whole. If we're saying if there are extra resources left over, and we're talking in the $20,000 to $40,000 range, we would want that to go to this line item, because it would just help to sort of provide additional support, but it's not going to solve this issue. So I don't worry about that piece, just knowing that the need is great, and it is vast, and it is widespread, and it is continuing to grow.
Okay,
And the food security issue is just a whole other bigger issue.
Thank you, Malia. I appreciate you clarifying and adding some additional context for that. Anyone else have any other insights or thoughts on the discussion at hand before I kind of make note of what I believe to be a recommendation?
I was going to say, I know that Elizabeth brought up housing, and I echoed kind of what we hear at Direct. However, I would defer to Lisa as well, especially if she's the recipient of some of this funding, because the other thing is I don't know who receives the housing support services funding. I think this is a really like we're being tasked with something that's a little challenging just because we don't know where all the funds used, and that's really tough. I'm glad that we're not going to get anything and we're just for extra money. Housing is a huge issue, but again, defer to what Lisa and Malia said with the home delivered meals being the priority.
Haley, I'm gonna, if you don't mind, I'm gonna ask you to kind of restate what you said, or say it all again, just because at least
Okay.
on my end, the audio cut out a little bit. I don't know if other people experienced that, but for my own peace of mind, I would like to hear it in its entirety, and also, as part of the process for anybody else who might be listening via YouTube and might have experienced something similar. As we move forward with this public input process, I want to make sure that your thoughts were heard. So if you wouldn't mind, if you could just restate that, that would be great.
Sure, I'll even maybe try to be more concise. Just that while and Elizabeth might have data from United Way, I was just commenting that Direct's information and referral services does receive a large amount of calls around housing, but that ultimately I would defer to Lisa in making home delivered meals the priority to receive extra funding, and then housing support services, just because it seems that Lisa is a recipient of the funds. So if she knows she's using it and she knows she doesn't have enough, then I mean, that's like a key piece of data that seems to be just making our job harder to know like where do the funds need to go. So I defer to what Lisa and Malia shared. Was that better? Is the
No,
audio
that
better?
was great. There wasn't anything wrong with what you said before. It's just the audio cut out. And so at least on my end a little bit. So I heard, a full sentence, and then I heard 3 words of a sentence, and then another full sentence. And I felt like I got the essence of what you were speaking to, but in case there was an important piece that I was missing, I would be remiss to not ask you to restate it. And then same for what I said before, I want to make sure everyone who's on the call, whether it be live streaming, YouTube, or on this subcommittee, has an opportunity to hear everything that you were sharing. I would ask Lisa, if you could just restate PCOA's role, just so that anyone who's listening via YouTube or as part of the subcommittee, as a refresher, because I just want to make sure people understand how that works as a council on aging. So when they hear, PCOA, they have the right context for that.
Sure, Janine. So Pima Council on Aging is the designated area agency on aging for all of Pima County. And that's a designation that provides a number of requirements of services that we have to provide for the community, as well as federal and state dollars to provide those services. So we run the helpline for older adults for the community, and the 3 services here that are listed on rows 7, 8, and 9. All those are services that we provide. That's the case management for older adults needing in-home care, the funding for the in-home care, and the Pima Meals on Wheels home delivered meals system. So that's all run through PCOA as a part of our role as the designated area agency on aging.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think that's just a helpful refresher for anyone that's, obviously on this subcommittee, but also for those that might be watching this via YouTube. So thank you for that. So unless there's additional comments, and I'm looking to see if anyone else has their hand up. So I don't think I see anyone, but if there aren't any other comments, and I'm going to give some pause here to see if there are, but if there aren't any other comments or thoughts on this, it sounds like the recommendation for this particular broad service category, Division of Aging and Adult Services, the recommendation is to leave the funding allocations as written by the Department of Economic Security, with kind of a footnote, if you will, that says that our recommendation is if there was monies left over, remaining, however you want to phrase that, those would be allocated to the 2 service intents known as home delivery meals and housing support services, reflected as line item 9 and 17 on this particular spreadsheet. And the priority would be priority 1, if you will. Part of those subsequent allocations would be for home delivery meals, and then priority 2, if you will, would be housing support services. If that's an accurate statement, and if there's no other comments, we are going to move to the next broad service category for Workforce Development Administration, or WDA. All right. In the absence of comments, I'm going to take that as we are prepared to move forward with that recommendation for this particular broad service category and move to Workforce Development Administration, WDA. Anyone opposed to moving on? All right, we're going to go ahead and move on to the next broad service category, WDA. Ask my IT team to go ahead and put that up. Thank you for that. All right, so for the Workforce Development Administration, the service category is employment services. There are no other service intents within WDA. Just like we did before, I'm going to ask if anyone has any thoughts or insights regarding this particular service intent and opportunities regarding any potential changes with regard to this service intent. And I'm just going to leave it at that. So if anyone has any thoughts or data that they want to share pertinent to this particular broad service category that would help us and guide us with regard to any potential recommendations for this category, I'm going to go ahead and open it up now. Right, just for clarity, I'm just going to go ahead and ask if anyone has any thoughts or insights as to whether or not there should be any changes to this particular funding allocation or prioritization.
Just as a point of clarification, were there any fact sheets submitted for this section?
Did not see any in my inbox this morning. I did check yesterday. I'm going to double, triple check, because sometimes a fact sheet or an email in general can slide into like a spam folder, if you will, right? Where it has extra security because it has an attachment, et cetera. So I'm going to double, triple check that with our IT team, make sure there's not any held in quarantine, so to speak, because of those measures, because we do try to protect information that way. So I will double check that, but as of right now, I did not see one. And I think I see Elizabeth's hand up.
Yeah, I'm just feeling so super helpful today because my only observation is that, this is such a small amount of funding. Obviously, this is not, going to fund Pima One Stop or any other employment services. So I wonder in a broader sense, how receptive DES is going to be to our repeated calls for just increases in general. The funding is flat, but inflation is, sizable. And so it just feels really critical that we communicate that while the money is appreciated, I imagine more would go a lot further. That's it.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I think that's a valid comment, especially for this particular category, given, relative to other categories, that the amount of money that's allocated here is obviously much smaller. Granted, there's fewer service intents within this category. Across all the categories, you could argue that we're all kind of facing the same plight, right? There's increasing costs, increasing demand in different areas relative to different service intents. And while we're appreciative of the funding that we have, we would also like to acknowledge that, with increasing costs, perhaps that money doesn't go as far as it used to. So I think we could definitely, make that as like a footnote, if you will, in terms of outcomes of this just particular discussion. I don't know how that we would quantify that per se as a recommendation. The other broad service category that we just completed, the DAAS, offering some tangible, if you will, elements to say, like, if there's monies available, the prioritization is X, Y, and Z. I think that can move forward as a recommendation a little bit easier than, you know, kind of a generalized statement, but we can definitely document it as part of the outcomes of this committee meeting. So we'll go ahead and acknowledge that.
Yeah, I just want to second that. And I was going to say that, but Elizabeth, I realized I had jumped in and you had your hand up, so I wanted to wait. But I do agree, and it is looking at the broad scope of everything from child support. Child care services to job training. I mean, to all of it is just for $41,708.05. From those of us that have the practical experience of being in the service world, that's not going to go very far to provide all of these resources. And so I think as much as this committee can also just go on record as saying that these are priority areas that need additional resources, I'm happy to also say that in public comment, but I do think that that's hopefully part of our role.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And on that note, if people have specific things that they would like to draw out from this particular service intent as part of kind of the bigger why regional need relative to the amount of monies that is allocated here, and as we can see, the amount of money here allocated is relatively small, you know, compared to others. It would help to substantiate kind of the voice that this subcommittee has around that particular broad service category, and making it kind of a stronger footnote, if you will, as we move forward with recommendations. So if there's any other information that anyone would like to speak to specifically, that would be helpful. And like I said, I will look for any fact sheets that might suggest some regional input that we could add to that. But as of right now, I was double checking with my IT team to see if there was any in quarantine, and as of right now, we're not seeing any. So if there's any additional comments with regard to supporting what we're discussing at hand right now, that would be the time to kind of voice that. And Elizabeth, I'm not sure if your hand is just still up or from before, or if it's newly up. So if you could help me with that, that would be great.
I appreciate the nudge, Janine, and I did put it up again just to say out loud, you know, this is a category that really closely aligns with the newly adopted Regional Prosperity Initiative, both at the county level and the city level. So those things were adopted with the sort of common foundational knowledge that, you know, we have a major crisis in terms of income and mobility. And, you know, I think this service category is aimed at, you know, helping people make their way out of those low income poverty situations. So I think it aligns well with, you know, what has already been identified as a regional need.
Thank you. I appreciate that. All right. So if there aren't any other comments, and again, I'm opening up to see if anyone else has any other input. If there are no other thoughts or considerations or data input regarding this particular broad service category, Workforce Development Administration, we're going to go ahead and move to the next broad service category, RSA. I don't see anyone's hand up, so we're going to go ahead and, with that being said, move to RSA. So for RSA, Rehabilitation Services Administration, you will see that there are two service intents: interpreter services for deaf adults and supportive intervention guidance counseling for hearing impaired persons. The service intents there are to assist deaf individuals in accessing and utilizing community services, including emergency services by providing interpreter services. And then, of course, the latter being to assist deaf and hearing impaired clients in solving or learning to cope with their disability, providing intervention, support, and counseling. So those are the two service intents. So if anyone has any regional input with regard to this particular broad service category, now would be a great time to kind of share that with the subcommittee. And then we will ask a very similar question as we've done before, is what recommendations, if any, do we have with regard to the different service intents and any potential changes to this particular broad service category? So I'm going to go ahead and open it up for anyone that has some thoughts or insights with regard to regional need.
I can just share that I know the need for us when we're trying to get interpreters. There definitely seems to be more need than providers. I don't know that that really helps with these particular service categories, but I think RSA has possibly their own interpreters. Like sometimes they've provided them. So like if this is helping fund those people, I mean, that's great, because when you try and get them in other ways, sometimes you just don't. Like we've been canceled on. We advocate to employers on why to hire people with disabilities, and I've had employers think they got all their ducks in a row, and then the interpreter isn't able to be there or whatever, it falls through. There's just other demands. So especially emergency services, I mean, I think that's pretty crucial. There's lots of people with hearing disabilities who show up. I don't know what those particular emergency services are, but they show up to like the hospital and don't always get the services. Like the communication isn't there. Like it, it's let's do this on paper, but if the conversation is more technical, they really should have a certified interpreter there. So any support for that is great. I don't know exactly how these funds are used by RSA, but just from our personal experience, it seems like anyone I can tell to go be an interpreter, I'm like, please be an ASL interpreter. We need more.
Thank you, Haley. I appreciate that. Elizabeth, I see your hand up as well.
Yes, I'm just going to echo Haley. I mean, and I'll put on my audiologist hat for this conversation and just say, we have the state school for the deaf here in Tucson. So we have a larger than maybe typical population of deaf and hard of hearing individuals. It's absolutely an accessibility and equity issue that there are good quality sign language interpreters at community events and meetings, and it is challenging to get interpreters, at least through COPD. There's just not that many. You have to have 2 interpreters at a meeting because it's an exhausting process to sign for a 2-hour meeting. So people have to switch back and forth. So I just think, it's well spent and important. And I don't know, again, $23,000 doesn't even cover, a salary. So I'm not sure utilization wise, what other sources support those things, but I do think it's pretty critical.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Does anyone have any data or input with regard to the associated costs for interpreter services that can be compared or evaluated to the regional need to kind of get some sense of where this funding sits relative to regional need?
I can just tell you from our service provider, or from our budget at the Community Food Bank, we pay for interpreter services for a number of community service events as well as for internal staffing. And our budget is probably about 2 to 3 times as much. So just to give you an idea of the cost, and that's only for the programs that we touch and not an entire section. Although we do serve 5 counties of all Southern Arizona, it's a very different specific subcategory than we're talking about here for this large group of individuals. So all that just to say, I don't think that this is enough money for this service, but definitely want to advocate for keeping it whole.
Okay, thank you. So if I am understanding you correctly, just as an example purposes, for your particular program, which at the risk of sounding like I'm minimizing, which I'm really not, but just scale, right? Your program arguably might be smaller relative to when we say serving an entire region. Your program in and of itself, the funding, or I'm sorry, the budget associated with that is 2 to 3 times what we're seeing represented on these particular line items for these interpreter services. So if we were to extrapolate out the budgetary need, if you will, on a regional level, it perhaps helps shed light on the gap. Is that an accurate statement of what you were trying to impart?
And that's the only reason I'm providing it, is just as an example for comparison.
Sure.
And
no, that's helpful.
To the
I
point
just want
that
to
we're
make sure
already,
that I'm understanding it correctly, as because we have a summary report that we have to type up at the end of this because it is a public meeting, and I want to make sure that as I make sure that we reconcile that I'm speaking to what you had shared correctly. So, and also just for those that are watching through the live stream on YouTube, or even after it's recorded, or members on the committee, making sure we're all on the same page. So I appreciate that.
yeah, I think to the point that was made earlier around certified interpreters, it is expensive to provide that service, and to have that guarantee of somebody showing up and to be able to do the very important work, it is a costly resource. So just, again, I'm just trying for emphasis to say these are expensive costs, and they are about accessibility and access in general, and making sure that people have that support.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that, Malia. All right, so my recap of what Malia said is basically my understanding of what we are, as a subcommittee, are saying with regard to this particular broad service category, is that we recognize that based on the regional need relative to what is allocated on this particular broad service category, using like Malia's program as an example, as a compare and contrast, through that lens, it does not make sense to change the funding allocation or the recommendations. However, as a subcommittee, we are acknowledging that based on regional need and the allocations that are on this document, it appears that there's a significant gap, much like for some of the other broad service categories. The funding amount relative to the need, there's a gap, and so we're acknowledging that. Is that an accurate reflection of what the subcommittee has decided? I don't even know if that's the right word choice, but has brought forth in this discussion for this particular category. Is that accurate? I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, so if that is not accurate, please correct me so I can make sure that I correct that.
Sounds accurate.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or input on this particular broad service category before we move on to the next step in this process? And just take a look and see anyone else's hands up. All right, so we're going to go ahead and go back to the first tab, or the first broad service category, Department of Child Safety. And so this is where we started, and we started at Department of Child Safety, moved to Division of Aging Adult Services, moved on to Workforce Development Administration, and then Rehabilitative Services Administration, RSA. So within these different broad service categories, we asked ourselves as a subcommittee, based on a regional need, is there a need to potentially shift funding allocations? That's kind of the journey that we've been on right now. So now we're taking a further step back and taking a look at all broad service categories and asking the question, and this is a big question, are we comfortable with leaving the funding allocations pertinent to each? Let's make sure I'm asking this question correctly. Are we comfortable as a subcommittee leaving the funding allocations for each of the different broad service categories as is, or is based on regional need, is there thoughts or input in terms of moving any monies arguably from one particular broad service category to another broad service category? Or are we asking that we just leave the funding allocations pertinent to each broad service category as written by Department of Economic Security? So that is essentially the discussion, if you will, at hand, like things that we need to be asking ourselves as part of this public input process is what is the regional need, and is there any merit to making that kind of a recommendation? And that is what I'm asking the subcommittee at this time. So if you have any thoughts, now would be the time to share those. Oh, I see, Lisa, sorry, I see your hand up. So go ahead.
I think it's hard for me to judge because there's not fact sheets presented for a number of these areas. So for example, when I look at the older adult needs and the fact that with funding reduction and increased need, services are being decreased by at least 30% in some different areas. Is that true in these other areas? Are they able to meet the need pretty well? I mean, I'm not sure what the apples to apples comparison is in that. So I don't know what to base something on to say, oh yeah, we should shift some from this area to that area.
Right. And I think that's a good point. And that's part of the reason why there's still, the public comment period where people have an opportunity to, share their thoughts on this. So this is arguably just one piece of that process. But as local area experts, if you will, we have asked local area experts to be a part of this subcommittee. And again, if they chose to submit a fact sheet, they are welcome to. And we are tasked, if you will, with part of that public input process to use information from whatever fact sheets were submitted and or any presentations or any contributions through this particular forum, right, members of the subcommittee. So I recognize the inherent challenges of this. But part of the process is to ask, big questions. And so here we are kind of trying to wrestle with what our thoughts are and what our perspectives are on regional need relative to that question. So if we don't necessarily have a recommendation to potentially move or make any changes with regard to the broad service categories, the recommendation arguably would be, by extension, to leave the funding allocations as written by Department of Economic Security, with obviously the elements that we've already talked about pertinent to specific broad service categories, specifically DAAS, where we asked if there was any monies arguably left over, they'd be allocated to home delivery meals and housing support services. But outside of that, all the funding allocations and respective prioritization of service intents would stay as written. But that's where we sit right now if we're not making any additional recommendations. Any other thoughts or comments regarding these different broad service categories and the respective funding allocations? Right. So I'm going to just double check, make sure I don't miss anyone's hand up. Every once in a while, for whatever reason, I don't see one, and I go, oh, wait, someone's hand's up. So I don't see anyone's hands up right now. So the next step of this particular process, to include the public input process, or I'm sorry, public comment process, which is part of our public input process, is that these recommendations would go to regional council for consideration and approval. Depending on what comes from the public comment period, there may be enough input and data, et cetera, based on regional need, et cetera, that would warrant us to reconvene and kind of take another closer look at the broad service categories and the respective allocations. But as of right now, the recommendations of this subcommittee that we've just kind of paved the way for is what is going to move forward into the next step of our public input process. So unless there are any other comments or recommendations that you would like to have added as we move forward with the next step, now would be the time to share those. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and move forward with the next item on the agenda. I'm just going to look to see if anyone has hand up. I don't see anyone else with their hand up. So I'm going to go ahead and move to the next item on the agenda. So I'm going to ask our IT team to bring that up. All right, so that brings us to the adjournment of this meeting. So it's 11:18. I appreciate everyone's investment of time in this important subcommittee. I will be reaching out to you to let you know if, in fact, through the next step of our public input process, if there would be a need for this particular subcommittee to reconvene. But as of right now, we're going to take these recommendations and move forward with our public input process to include going to regional council for consideration and approval. Just as a reminder, this subcommittee doesn't review any applications, reports, or have any input on the state process once the plan is approved. So just a reminder on that. I appreciate each and every one of you for investing time in this and all the work you did to prepare for this meeting, and being candid and open and providing insights, and also asking really good questions. So I appreciate that. Thank you so much for being a part of this subcommittee. Have a great day. I'm going to go ahead and adjourn the meeting. It is 11:19. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much, Janine. Have a great day.
Thanks,
Bye.
Janine and everyone.